of the next item. The title of the next item is Planning to Win by Alicia, Nationals Training Director, and I have taken numerous trainings by her team. One thing I want to say is that to help the club to keep these wonderful programs going, I encourage everyone to keep donating as little or as much as you can, however you can. So Alicia, thank you so much for coming here.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Hi, everyone. Again, Alicia Ybarra. I use she and they pronouns. I live in Baltimore and I'm the training director. And I'm here to talk to you to share a campaign planning model. And but first I wanted to start, and I hope this is okay, Hoyen, I wanted to, throughout my presentation here, I stop and pause and ask for a little of participation. And so I wanted to start by asking, why do we think it's important to have a plan when you're about to start a campaign? If anyone would like to offer, if you raise your hand, I'll call on a couple people to get us started. Why is it important to have a plan when you're starting a campaign?
Okay, do we have a hand? I'm going to pick one person now. I'm looking at the Richard Rawlings.
Oh, we have some. We have some.
Sorry. Marissa, go ahead. You got 2 minutes.
Oh boy, my answer is a lot shorter though. I was just going to say basically so that you have a path to victory. You can't achieve your goal without a plan. Of course, you know, plans will have to be modified along the way because factors change along during a campaign or what have you. But a general plan is always really important in order to achieve your end goal.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think we could take one more person and then move on.
All right, Karen has her hand up.
Yes, if without a plan, people go, each member of the committee will go off in separate directions and each have their own idea and a lot of clashing will happen.
Thank you. Also, so both of those were exactly correct. Having a path to victory is incredibly important, and having a plan that everyone is sticking to so that we're all moving in the same direction is incredibly important. And also that grassroots organizing campaigns are about people power over the power of money. They're about building relationships. And some say that an organizer's most important resource is the relationships that they hold. So this is relationships with partners, relationships with potential volunteers or current leaders, that the relationships that we hold are one of our greatest resources as grassroots organizers. Grassroots organizing is also about developing leaders as a key way to build power. It's about setting specific real world goals and tactics that really demonstrate our power. And in order to do all of those things, we definitely need a plan. And so, Hoyen, if you don't mind, if we could start sharing the slides.
All right. I was going to ask if it's time to do that. All right.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you moving the slides for me. So we talked about why plan. And so I think we can move on to the next slide. Where I think we talk about, oh yeah, so laying the foundation. So we're going to go over some key elements of laying the foundation to your strategy, to your plan. Next slide, please. The first one is about what we call sometimes cutting the issue or deciding on what issue we're going to work on. And one of the hardest things is to tell the difference between a problem that we want to tackle and what an issue is that we can build a campaign around. So we like to start first by talking about the difference between problems and issues. And you can read the slide there, but another way to think about it is to think about your community and what do you think is the biggest problem facing your community today? Now think about what it would look like to start working on that problem. Like, where would you start? How can you break the problem down into smaller parts? And usually we can't solve a whole problem in one campaign. And so we like to break it down into partial solutions around which we can build a campaign. And that's called an issue. So as you see here, can we go, as you see here, the way that we define it on the slide is that a problem is a big area of concern, like the ones listed there: climate change, pollution, unaffordable healthcare. But an issue, like a partial solution that we can start building a campaign around, are things like enacting renewable energy standards, regulating factory emissions, or passing national health care. So that's the difference between a problem and an issue. And as we know, excuse me, organizing is about building power. And we do this by winning issue campaigns and strengthening our organization along the way. All right, thank you so much. Next slide. So we want to also talk about principles and values. So here we have some very basic justice-based campaign principles that we like to share. One is that we seek, through our campaigns, through our issues, we seek to win real, immediate, and concrete improvements in people's lives. And that those directly impacted become active and effective in the political process and in their communities. That really speaks to working directly with impacted communities. It speaks to our leadership development work, et cetera, and about being inclusive. And that our campaign seeks to alter the relations of power between people, the government, and other institutions. So part of what this means is we don't want to fight the same fight every single year. We want to win, and then we want that victory to be codified in law or in public policy, so that we don't have to have the same campaign every single year. So seeking real improvements, working with those directly impacted, and seeking to alter relations of power for the long term. So some key campaign principles. Next slide, please. Thank you. And of course, you all are familiar with the Jemez principles. Be inclusive, emphasis on bottom-up organizing, let people speak for themselves, work together in solidarity and mutuality, build just relationships among ourselves, and a commitment to self-transformation. And so for those of you that might be newer, the Jemez principles were offered to the Sierra Club and to other large environmental organizations by environmental justice organizations many years ago as a way, as a guide for us for how we are in the movement, how we think about ourselves and our role in the movement. And so Sierra Club adopted these principles, I think at least 6 or 7 years ago, because they had been adopted already when I joined the Sierra Club. And so we like to talk about the Jemez principles as a kind of a guide for when we do our campaign work. Excuse me, next slide. And I also wanted to share Sierra Club's brand new values. So last year, Sierra Club adopted these values as our organizational values, that we want to work towards becoming an anti-racist organization and center anti-racism in our work, that we want to have a good and healthy work-life balance, that we know that the best way to build power in our organization is through cross-team and with partner collaboration, that we want to work towards justice, not exclusively towards just our very narrow campaign goals, but that we also want to pay attention to the larger landscape of social justice, and that we want to be in just relationships with each other. And then transformation, the organization itself is in the process of transformation, and that we also commit to self-transformation, that we want to be individually on an equity journey, that we want to always be working on our learning edges, that we're committed to, as individual leaders, to also constantly be working on improving our own leadership skills. So these are Sierra Club's values, and I wanted to share them with you all. They just came into the organization last year. And I want to stop there and ask another question. Again, just take a couple of people. Why is it important for us to ground our campaign work in principles and in our values? Why would we want to start there?
Yvonne?
Hi, I'm glad to be back. I had to log out for a moment. I worked with the National Sierra Club's core values team, and we worked very hard on coming up with these 5 core values for 2 years. We did a lot of stakeholder input from various parts of Sierra Club and held 4 town halls to get further information. And we were given a task to narrow down a very long list of proposed values. And we finally came down to these 5 because we were told to cut it down to 5 to 6. So it's very important for the Sierra Club to be focused on these, because the reason why we came up with these values is to address internal Sierra Club issues that were brought up by the Ramona report that came out to the Sierra Club. So especially the last one, transformation, we as a club are looking at ourselves as an organization and as individuals, and working on transforming ourselves so that we can incorporate all of these values into everything that we do. Because this is the only way we're going to be able to stay relevant in our current world issues and the national situation in our country. And because we want to be relevant and sensitive to the needs of environmental justice communities, especially since these communities are the ones that are going to be the most and first impacted by climate change. So it is very important that we really do a deep dive into our own internal beliefs and practices so that we can incorporate these and work towards a more just relationship with all ourselves within Sierra Club, as well as with our partners outside.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. I think we should move on to the next slide. So to continue, we're in the laying the foundation of our campaign plan. So the next thing we think about is our theory of change. So this is a general sketch of our path to victory. I really like that phrase, path to victory, that someone offered earlier. We think about what do we want? And here is where we think about what is our long-term vision? What are our long-term goals? What is the big longer-term thing that we're really working towards? What do we want? And then we work downwards from there to smaller incremental goals. But we start with thinking about what is it that we want? What are we going to fight for? And then we think about who has the power to give us what we want. And we call that a decision maker or a target. And then who does that person listen to? And sometimes that's called a secondary target. And we identify a secondary target because often we have more influence over the secondary targets that we do over the primary target. And so we like to identify who's the main decision maker, and then who are other people that we can also target, who we have a stronger connection to, and then that person can work with us to influence the primary target. And then next is what will motivate people to act, what will motivate the target to act, the decision maker. And this is when we think about our tactics. So how can we demonstrate through our tactics that we have power and aim those tactics at the decision maker? So the last one is what will motivate people to act, and that's when we think of our targets. So here, just to recap, is we think about what are our goals, who is the decision maker, who could be possibly a secondary target that can help us influence the decision maker, and then what tactics, what actions are we actually going to do? So that's a quick sketch of a theory of change. It's like a little outline of questions that we can ask ourselves to start our thinking about our strategy. Next slide, please. And then now is where we think about what resources do we have? How many other campaigns are we running this year that are stretching our resources? What is a realistic picture of the resources that we can bring to this campaign, to this issue campaign? So we like to think about specific leaders that we have that we can bring into the campaign, relationships that we can leverage, skills of our leaders and of our staff, physical resources, like do we have office space? Do we have digital tools like Zoom and listservs and social media? What are our staff resources? What staff can be 100% dedicated to this particular campaign, or what percentage of their time do we have to work on the campaign? And then of course, our budget. How much money are we going to be able to invest in this particular campaign? And really briefly, what are other resources that are not listed here that you all can think of that we could muster towards an issue campaign? What are other types of resources that we should include in this list? If someone wants to raise their hand, if you think of something. And it's okay if we don't have anything right now, we can move on.
I have one.
Oh, go ahead.
Media.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I said the media. That's one resource I would add.
Yes.
To it. And Pat Holland.
A lot of other nonprofits have something more nimble than Sierra Club has, which is when there's something they want action on quickly, they inform their members, whichever way they inform, with something, on the internet, with something that they can click on that will immediately have a message in it. And they give the people who they're asking to sign that message, they have to write their name, address, whatever, zip code, but they also give them a canned speech, but allow them to alter the speech, because that is way more than twice effective as everyone signing the exact same words, is what I've been told in DC. Sierra Club doesn't have that. It would be nice if we did. At least my chapter doesn't. I understand there's another chapter in California that has a paid organizer who does that. But you get a whole lot more action if you did. People don't have the time to be signing all these things and listening to all the chit chat back and forth. If they can get a nice canned message that they can mess with in their own words and maybe even make better, you get a lot more response, I believe.
Thank you. So we have that resource plus media that Hoyen offered. And I think we can move on to the next slide. So that was all laying the foundation, how we get started in building our campaign. And now I'm going to show you, and there's a little bit of repetition here, but I'm going to show you the full campaign model and then go through it kind of one piece at a time. So we can go on to the next slide. Okay, so here it's listed all the different elements of the planning model that we want to share. And we start up on the left side. We talked a little bit already about our vision and our values. And what is ultimate success or victory look like? We talked about our values and we shared campaign principles like making concrete improvements in people's lives and altering relations of power. We talked about the Jemez principles, and we also talked about Sierra Club's organizational values of anti-racism, balance, justice, transformation. So those are our vision and values. And then we just talked about our theory of change, our general sense of how we will win. What do we want? Who's the decision maker? How much resources and power do we have? And what are the tactics that we're going to use? And what resources do we have? That's a sketch of our kind of outline theory of change. And then we go in a little deeper, starting again with campaign goals. So for this particular issue, what are the goals that we're setting? What does victory look like? What specifically are we asking for? Is it a piece of legislation? Is it a public policy? Is it a regulation? What's the specific goal or outcome that we're going for? And the next is power or organizational goals. And here is where we talk about how is our organization going to be stronger as a result of us running this campaign, win or lose. Like during the course of the campaign, what are we going to do to strengthen the power of our organization? Are we going to build teams? Are we going to develop new leaders? How many? Are we going to recruit new activists? How many? Are we going to increase our media exposure and our name brand out in the public? What are organizational strengthening goals that we want to set to go alongside our campaign or issue goals? Next is allies, constituents, and opponents. So here is where we brainstorm who are all the people who care about this issue or are impacted about because of this issue, and how are they organized? Are there organizations that could be allies of ours that we could reach out to? Are there communities that are most impacted where we could do door-to-door canvassing or other kinds of outreach or phone banking? And who are the opponents? Who's actively going to organize and spend money to prevent us from winning this campaign? And we also want to look at how much power and influence they have over the target, over the decision maker. And we can do this by looking at what our resources are and what our influence is and how many allies we have and what they're bringing in terms of resources and influence, and then compare that to what our opponents have in terms of resources, in terms of influence over the decision maker, and give ourselves a reality check there. Like, are our goals things that we can actually win at this point, or do we need to work more on organizing the constituents and getting allies to come on board? So that's allies, constituents, and opponents. And then we move on to our targets. And here we talked about this already a little bit. Who's the decision maker? It always has to be one person. It can't be a body or a committee. And if it is, then we ask you to pick a specific person to be the primary target, someone who we have some influence over. And then the secondary target we talked about, someone who can help us influence the main target. And then we talked a little bit about the power map, where we compare our resources and allies to the opponents and give ourselves a reality check there. And then the next part of the planning model is campaign communication. So here is this is our messaging and our organizing narrative. And so we'll talk about each of these a little bit more in a minute. Our message is our overarching message. Our organizing narrative is, if we're having a one-on-one organizing conversation with someone, what does that arc look like of the story that we're telling and the ask that we have, what we're asking people to do or to come in and to join us in doing what? That's our organizing narrative. And it should be values-based, it should be understandable, it should evoke emotion and not be filled with wonky language. And then next and almost last is our tactics. And a lot of times we like to start with our tactics instead of doing all of this other work first, but we like to put tactics towards the very end. And we like to put our tactics on a timeline that leads us to put together a good work plan to actually conduct our tactics. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Our tactics are what the actions that we're actually going to take. They show our power to the decision maker. Organizing the tactics should serve as a vehicle to recruit volunteers and develop the leadership skills of our leaders. And tactics should escalate over time. And then every campaign should have a budget where we list really as specifically as we possibly can all the resources that we have to bring into the campaign. And this planning model in this sequence that I just walked through, although very quickly, can serve as an outline for a joint planning conversation that we would have with our partners, for example. It's important to bring in partners, especially those from impacted communities, in like during the vision stage, when we're visioning, what is it that we're going to try to do? What's our long-term plan? Is when it's important to bring in partners that we want to work with at the local level. Next slide, please. And so this is all the same stuff, but it's in the form of a house. It can be helpful to think of it, building the plan in the form of a house. Sequence is really key. We start at the bottom and work our way up. We start with our vision and values, as we talked about, and then we move on to our goals. And I want to say a little bit more about each of these and go through the house one at a time here. So next slide, please. So in terms of our goals, we want them to be real world outcome goals, so very concrete. We want to be able to really clearly state what does a win look like. We want them to be concrete improvements. I talked about that. And then, so that's one side of the goals that we want. We want campaign goals. And then we also want our organizational goals. Like I talked about before, how is our organization going to be stronger because we ran this campaign? Next slide. And so here are some examples of what power building or organizational goals are. There are things like how many new leaders are we going to have? How many new teams are we going to form? How many new activists are we going to recruit? How many allies with grasstops organizations are we going to build into our alliance and partnerships? And other organizational questions to think about during this stage are, one of them is around equity considerations. So things like, does our leadership reflect the community that we're working in? How will we engage all impacted communities from the beginning? Those are a couple of equity considerations when we're in this part of goal crafting our goals. And then also internal obstacles. When we're looking at ourselves as an organization, what are some internal problems that we're having, either conflicts or divisions that might get in our way as we're working on this campaign or working with this coalition or alliance? So it's good to have a realistic view of ourselves and what things need to be mitigated or worked on so that we're in shape to work on the campaign. I think next slide. Yes, so here's like just a quick example of the specificity needed for leadership development goals. You want specific numbers of new leaders and new teams, and you want to put them on a timeline. So I just wanted to share that as an example of the kind of specificity that we're looking for when we're developing either one of our goals, the campaign goals or the organizational strengthening goals. And so now I want to move us to, I know that was really fast. This is actually like a 3 or 4 hour training that we're compacting into 1 hour. So it's really an outline of the planning model. We won't be able to dive deep into each part, but we do want to dive into crafting goals. And so I think in the next slide, if we can move on to the next slide, breakout creating goals is, yeah, just the breakout one is fine. That's going to be next after goals, talking about how to identify the target. So in terms of creating goals, we want to do a 10-minute breakout. And we want to ask you to spend the first 5 minutes working individually. Think about a campaign that you're currently working on, or think about a campaign that you're about to start working on, and try to craft a couple of campaign goals, or even just one, and then a couple of organizational strengthening goals that you would do during the course of that campaign. So take 5 minutes to just jot down some notes for yourself, some ideas, and then take the second 5 minutes, excuse me, to report out. You're going to be in a very small group, I think maybe about 4 people, and to report out what you came up with and get a little bit of feedback from your colleagues. So whenever we're ready, we could start our 10-minute breakout around goal setting. So you're working to craft some goals, campaign goal, organizational goal, and then get a little feedback from your colleagues on it. And we'll be in there for about 10 minutes.
Okay, so sorry, Alicia, this is Nathan. So you want 4 to 5 participants in each breakout room, correct?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to do that then. All right. We're about to start the breakout rooms. I'm going to auto close after 10 minutes, you said?
Yes.
Okay. All right. All right, here we go. Yeah, I guess I need to join a breakout room also. Let me find one.
Probably stop the
Oh,
recording.
hello. I think I'm in your breakout room. Can you hear me?
Oh, maybe this is, yeah, maybe. I mean, we could use this as a breakout room. All right, I'll stop the recording or I'll pause it.
Welcome back, everyone. So we have time for a really brief report back, just maybe a couple teams, if you want to share a highlight or how that went, if that was easy or hard. But any thoughts or insights you have about crafting goals, both for the campaign and for the organization itself in terms of capacity building. Would anyone like to share?
It's like Carol wants to speak.
Well, I just wanted to say that I think it's sometimes hard to tell the difference between goals and tactics. And so it might be helpful to just have some tips on how to differentiate and concretize.
Okay. One of the ways I think about it in terms of the difference between a goal and a tactic is a goal is something that we win. We win it from a decision maker. And a tactic is an action that we're taking to demonstrate our power. So if I get confused, which I do sometimes, I think about, is this something that we're winning from a decision maker? Or is this an activity that we're doing that's aimed at the decision maker to show them that we have people power? So that's one way that I distinguish between the two.
Thanks, that's great.
Okay, cool. We have time for one other person, if somebody else wants to share, and then we'll move on to the rest of the elements of the campaign planning model.
Sandra.
Thank you. I'm working on the Northern National Forest as a section of National Monument. This area is basically a stepchild of the Angeles National Forest. And we have been losing resources as resources have gone to the San Gabriel side of the Angeles Forest. So we are working with our local indigenous people, the Aviam Chumash and the Katatamuk. One of our goals is to their cultural areas, elevate the tribal history, and we would like to have some opening of local camping. There's no local camping. We're the third largest city in Santa Clarita in LA County, and yet we don't have any nearby camping. And we're surrounded by national forest. We're concerned about safety, so we're hoping to be able to get, I'm stopping my video because my internet is insecure. And we're hoping to get safety and forest presence and finances in many ways that we're working on. Our allies, we've been working with local community members and local electeds to hopefully eventually go on to work with county supervisor and our congressman. Our opposition has been primarily the mountain bikers. We're trying to make an ally relationship with the off-road vehicles because there's a large off-road vehicle area that we are talking about protecting. And the idea is to put us in a position that perhaps, hopefully with the help of the Tatavium, that we will be able to get funding to protect this area and make it a more usable forest for people, the indigenous people and the local people.
Wow. Thank you for sharing all those goals. I appreciate it. Thank you, Sandra. I think we need, if we could show the slide deck again, move on to the rest of the planning model. Thank you all for those that shared. And we're going to keep going on that house that I showed you with the next slide. I think it should be about targets and target. So again, we've talked about this. The targeted is the decision maker. We talk about there being a primary target. And this is the person who has the power to actually deliver your victory, that the person that you need to say yes, that you need to persuade or pressure. And then we can move on to the next slide. We talked about secondary target, and this is someone who you have more influence over, and this person has influence over your primary target. So that's a way to think about who could be your secondary target. And moving on to the next slide, we talk about target audience. And so there's a couple ways to think about target audience. One is to think about, for our messaging, our campaign communications, who is the audience that we're most trying to persuade to care about this issue? That could be your target audience, is who is our messaging targeted at? And these are usually people who can influence the primary target. So a lot of times we talk about grass tops being a target audience, and grass tops, if you're not familiar with that term, relates to people, local influential people, leaders of local grassroots groups, people in positions of power or influence at the local level who we want to be on our side. So that's one way to think about target audience. Another one on the next slide, we talked about, I'll just go over it really briefly, is constituents, allies, and opponents on the next slide. Constituents are people who care about it or are impacted by the issue. Allies are other organizations that share our values or want to see the same outcome that we do. And then, of course, the opponents are organizations or individuals who are going to actively oppose you and actually spend money to stop you. So that's constituents, allies, and opponents. And then moving on to the next slide, something we haven't talked about yet is messaging. So we think about what will motivate people to act, both the target and the constituents. We want a frame, we want an overall frame and narrative. We want an overarching media story. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We want there to be some key talking points and hopefully a very brief, memorable slogan. And we talk about an organizing narrative. And this I mentioned, if you are doing one-on-one conversations and you have an ask, like something that you're inviting people into, that you're asking them to do, what is that script? And usually you want to train people around your organizing narrative so that all of us are having the same kind of one-on-one conversations. So this is a brief kind of thumbnail synopsis around messaging. And then on the next slide, we talk a little bit about narrative structure. No, the one before that, I'm sorry. There's one more on messaging. So we talk a little bit about narrative structure. There's one narrative structure that's called challenge, choice, outcome, where you talk about a specific challenge. You talk about the choices laying in front of us. You know, we could go this way or that way. Obviously, we're advocating for one of those ways. And then the outcome is the vision of the kind of world that we're trying to build, or the outcome is what it is that we're going to win. It's our goals. And then another narrative structure for telling a good story is the one that's here on the screen. It's one where you present a threat. So for example, like climate change is a big threat. And then you talk about who is the victim. And you could phrase it or frame it as our kids or our kids' future. And then there's a villain who that could be fossil fuels, or it could be a really specific company. A hero, this is usually the decision maker or the target. So it could be the mayor or the governor. And then a successful resolution is the demand that we're making, which could be like, for example, renewable energy. So that's a quick run through around some messaging concepts. And then the last thing that we talk about is tactics. So we can go on to the next slide. And these are actually, before I share what I have to share about tactics, let's see, do I have time? Oh, I don't really have time. I'm gonna keep going, finish up, and that we will have a few minutes left for questions. But what I wanted to ask you, what is important? What is an important thing to think about, or important things to think about when planning your tactics? But we don't have time to share right now, but I'm going to keep going. Actions they're actions that we will take. That is what a tactic is. It's an action that we will take. It's supposed to put pressure on the target. So it affects something that the target cares about. It communicates what we want. So clearly, in every tactic, it should be clear what it is that our demand is, or what we're asking for, what we're trying to win. Tactics should serve as a way for us to recruit new people. And also, we should give out roles when we're planning a tactic to our volunteers and to our leaders, to give them a sense of ownership over the campaign, and also to help them develop their leadership skills. And equity questions when thinking about tactics is it culturally appropriate? Does it build solidarity? How will tactics be received by the people you are trying to recruit? Are the impacted communities on board with this tactic? And do you need logistical things like translation to make it more inclusive? Let's see, next slide, please. Okay, we covered that stuff, a little bit of the criteria. It shows our power, it's focused on the decision maker, et cetera. I think we could go on to the next slide. And then you want to put your tactics on a timeline. You want to start small, you want to build a drumbeat, you want to turn up the volume or the intensity over time. And you want to actually put it, this one doesn't show dates, but you want to put it on a specific timeline. And be sure when you're planning your tactics to include all of the preparation and lead up that is required in order to actually carry out a successful tactic. So leave room for things like recruitment phone banks, sending out emails, getting materials printed, publicizing, training and preparing your spokespeople and things like marshals if that's needed. And then you can see that there are peaks and valleys. The peaks are when you actually do the tactic itself, and the valleys are when you're planning or celebrating a successful tactic, or doing trainings, or evaluating your work and seeing how much progress you've made towards your goals, and you're doing additional strategizing. So that's a quick tactics timeline, and I think we can move on to the next slide, which I believe is the last slide. So here's the house. It's kind of a nifty way to remember the process. You start at the bottom and work your way up. And I'm gonna stop there. And I think the next slide is for questions, but I'm gonna ask Koyen, do we have time for questions? I'm not sure if we're going till the end of the hour or till 35.
Yes, we do. We have it until 12:35, so we have 5 minutes.
Okay, fantastic. So any thoughts you want to share, or insights or questions?
Nathan?
Yeah, thanks so much, Alicia, for this presentation. It occurs to me, having taken a couple of organizing trainings like this, how complicated it is to organize a campaign, how many things there are to keep track of. And I think this would be something that those of us who are learning the ropes of organizing, it would be nice to be able to check in with someone who's an experienced organizer about the plan that we have, trying to understand, like, hey, are we doing things correctly? Get some advice, get some mentorship. What sort of resources are available from national for that sort of thing? Are there like office hours? Are there ways that we could sign up to get a consult from national organizing staff, that sort of thing?
I don't actually know. I know that we have a fantastic organizing unit at National, led by Bob Bingaman and Sarah Matsumoto. And you could reach out to them directly. And I know that from time to time, people on my team, which is the training team and also the strategic implementation team, we make time, if you wanted to reach out to one of us, for coaching on a kind of case by case basis. We don't have office hours. And I bet that Bob Bingaman and Sarah Matsumoto and others on the organizing team would be, depending on their capacity, be willing to offer to do one-on-ones on a case by case basis if you wanted to reach out directly.
Karen has something to share. She's learning about it all the time.
Right, I'm always trying to learn. And I'm also always trying to, I guess, educate the people I work with. I build campaign plans for the Stop Clear Cutting campaign, but I think what would really help me a lot, Alicia, is if I could have a kind of a link to the video of your training, because asking people to go to like 2 hours or a day or two training on organizing, it won't happen. But if it's a short one like you just did, I think it would really help, the other people I'm planning with to get a better sense of what we're trying to accomplish.
I think that, yes, I did a lot in 1 hour, ran through the whole model, but I think the video of this is being recorded, and I believe you will have access to this video, I believe.
Yeah, if Hoyen, if you could make sure that you can pull out just Alicia's training, so we could.
That's the plan.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Alicia. Very good job. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We have Rob. Rob just lowered his hand, I guess. So actually, I just want to say, I actually thought Karen was going to say it. Actually, National does do this kind of training ongoing, and there is a series going on right now. And there will be another series of training in March. Su Qiao, you have something to say? Su Qiao?
Hello. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I'd like to ask a question about situations that we actually encounter relatively frequently in our chapter, which is, there are, often disagreements about how to interpret National's policy. Okay. Like, is there someone we can call or communicate with to determine whether or not, whether or not National agrees with, one interpretation or another? And the second question I have is, there's also confusion over, sometimes it's not clear what Sierra Club California's stance is vis-a-vis Nationals. Then do we, go by Sierra Club California's stances, or do we only have to align with Nationals? because there have been arguments in our chapter whereby people say, okay, it is, Sierra Club California's, position, but it's not nationals. So we don't have to abide by that.
I'm afraid I'm not really qualified to answer
Okay.
governance conversations or governance questions, I'm sorry,
Okay.
about interpreting policy or whose stance
Right.
is, over someone else's. I'm sorry, I'm not really, I don't think I can really speak to that.
Okay, thank you.
Well, we are at 12:35 now. So Alicia, thank you so much for the training.
Thank you.
We will send out a follow-up email to everybody. So that will include information recording from this session. I will let you go back to your East Coast life now.
I'm gonna go walk my dog.
All right, sounds great. So I'm going to turn on my video. Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, so now we're going to take lunch break. Actually,